Hey guys, what's up? And welcome to Let's Play FVD and NoLimits 2. In this series, I'm going to show you how to use FVD to create smooth tracks in NoLimits. I know that you can accomplish that with hand building, but I also know that there are a lot of people out there who really want to learn to use FVD because of its power. So my intention is to let you follow along as I build a coaster so you can see from start to finish how it's done. There are a great many videos that show you how to build certain elements or drop or something like that in FVD, but I haven't seen any that show the creation of a ride from start to finish. So that's what we're going to do here. And we're going to start with two assumptions. The first is that you know how to use NoLimits 2. If not, there are plenty of videos that will show you how to do that. And the second assumption is that you have a rudimentary knowledge of FVD++. That means that you've watched a few videos, you know how to do a straight section and a curve, maybe create a lift hill, and then after that you're stumped. You've gotten to the force sections and you just don't know what to do. If you're not at least that far along, there are plenty of other videos that will bring you up to speed on the very basics before we get started here. And that's it. Just follow along with me while I build and you should get the hang of it in no time. All right. What we're going to do is I'm going to redo an old ride that I created a while ago. It's called Something Wicked. I liked how the ride turned out overall, but I've wanted to redo it for a long time because I thought there were a few trouble spots in it. It's a fairly simple ride. It's a B&M out and back, which is one of the easiest things that you can do when you're first learning NoLimits, FVD, excuse me. So what I'm going to suggest you do is once we get this up and running, once we get the program up and running, you just follow along and you do what I'm doing. You open a new file, you create it just like I'm doing, and you follow along, and that will at least get you started on understanding how the system works. In this episode, like I said, we're going to be dealing mostly with normal forces up and down. We'll use a little bit of roll here and there to achieve some of our results, but mostly what we're going to be doing is just trying to do something simple to get you comfortable with the program. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and ride this so we can see the basics of the ride and what it's all about. So what I envisioned this ride to be was for a small park. I thought about a park that maybe had some money, but not so much that they could afford a huge B&M ride, and maybe it would be out of place in their park. It might be a small traditional park, and they didn't need a 200 or 300 foot ride. So what we have here is a 5-foot ride that really takes advantage of the terrain. It takes off through the woods and really hugs the ground most of the time. So let's give it a ride. We're at the top, and once we get back, we'll keep talking. Cool. So that was Something Wicked. Like I said, I have 3 problems with this ride. Overall, I do like it quite a bit. I like how it takes off through the woods, but I have 3 problems that I really want to address in this. And the first one is this turnaround. I don't think it's very effective. I don't think it's very B&M-like. I do like the speed on it. It stays low to the ground, and it really roars around that turn, but it's not exactly what I was looking for, but it was what I was able to achieve at this time because this is when I was just learning NoLimits. So that's one thing I want to change. I've got a, whoops, sorry about that. I've got a, let's go back. All right. I've got all right, I've got a idea of what I want to do here in terms of something with a little more swoop and maybe with a double or triple down, something very similar to what Lightning Rod does. So I think I can achieve that. The next thing I really want to change is this hill right here. You can see, let me back up just a little bit. You can see that it curves to the right. Most of the curve is right here. This sets up the angle, but then up here, this part is still banked for a good long time, even though it's going straight. It's a minor thing, but it's something that bothers me about the ride, although I do like this view here quite a bit. That bothers me quite a bit about the ride, so I want to correct that. And then finally, the main thing I really want to change is this S-turn right here. I really dislike this. I think it's just not very good. I wanted a little bit of action right here. I wanted something that broke up the out and back layout a little bit and offered a little bit of a different sensation. Unfortunately, my grasp of the tool at this time was such that this is what I was able to get out. This is what I was able to get the tool to do at this time. It doesn't ride like something that was intentional to me. It rides more like, okay, this is what I was actually able to do. It's functional. I'm going to go ahead and use that. And unfortunately, that's not what I want on this ride. I think I can do better. So those are the three things overall that I want to change. Otherwise, I'm pretty satisfied with how this came out. The park overall, I mean, I guess I could go ahead and put some other stuff in here, but the way I saw it was the visitors would be coming in right here. Maybe there's an old wooden coaster over here. Maybe I could build one day. But you came in through here. This was the midway. Something Wicked is on the right. Almost all of the ride is hidden except for the first drop. I really thought about people standing along the fence here and watching the ride come down the hill and take off through the woods. So that's the main thing I want to do in this ride. And one other thing I should point out is the profile of this hill. I know that a lot of people are very particular about getting the look of B&Ms, Intamins, etc. very correct. And I also understand that this doesn't look like a typical B&M drop. Their drops tend to have a very distinct shape. There are two reasons why this doesn't look that way. First is because when I first started using this program, I wasn't as good at it as I am now, and I couldn't achieve that. The second reason is because I really don't care for the shape of most B&M drops and airtime hills. I know that they're very, very deliberately done by B&M to produce a certain sensation of float or airtime. I just don't find them particularly aesthetically pleasing. I find this sort of look much better. And this has ejector air here, whereas most B&Ms do not. I think, if I remember correctly, that this hits -1G in it. I know that's way more than B&M would ever do, so we're just going to say, for the sake of argument, that B&M licensed their track and train to me, and I'm the one who's designing the coaster for my own purposes. There are other videos that will show you, they'll be very exacting about the shape of a B&M drop and airtime hills. There is another dude, and I'm sorry, I've completely forgotten his name right now, but he has two videos. One is with the Shambhala drop, and there's another one with airtime hills, and both of those really show you in detail how to do the B&M style. And the video with the airtime hills also shows you how to do the Intamin style of camelbacks and so forth. And I think what you'll find is it's very easy to do that in FVD. Once you know how to use the system, it's very simple. So you're not going to have too much problem with that. But for now, this is what we're going with. You'll still be able to learn how to do the drops and so forth, so that's all that really matters. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and look at FVD. All right, finally, here we are in FVD. Sorry for the long intro and all the yapping, but I wanted to give you my philosophy for what we're going to be doing with this series, show you where we were starting from, and just give you an idea of where we're going. So finally, we're here. We're going to get started. So as you can see right here is the ride that we were just looking at a moment ago in NoLimits, and you can see the hard line and everything about it. One other thing you'll notice over here is I have several different versions of this ride, actually. I liked it so much when I made it the first time that I decided, well, hey, maybe I should try it at 200 feet. So we've got the 200-foot version, which is a little bit different, and then we've got the 300-foot version as well. And as I was just saying a few seconds ago about shaping, you can see the shape of this is a little more like typical B&M. It's not 100% exact, but It's definitely more in the style of B&M, and it certainly dwarfs the 135-foot model we have here. But I'm going to go ahead and still be updating the 135 model because that's the one I like the best. So a few things I wanted to show you before we get started are some naming conventions I use. What I find is when I make a coaster in FVD, oftentimes I'll get started, I'll make the ride up through here and I'll say, hey, that looks great, I'll save it. I'll import it into NoLimits, I'll ride it a few times, think it looks great. Come back the next day, I ride it again, and I'm like, that's not so good. So what I usually do is, if I do want to make changes, I want to save this base copy in case the changes I make just suck and I want to do something different. It's very simple to do that, and I'm going to do it here with our new version. So I'm highlighting the version that we're going to be using, and I'm going to click Add, and we're adding from another FVD project. So hopefully, I don't think you all can actually see the windows that are popping up, but I'm choosing the FVD project that, the current one that we have open. And if I can find it, give me just a second here. Nope, it's not there. Nope, it's not there either. Come on. Nope. Hold on a second here. Where is this thing? Maybe it's here. Yep. All right, and you can't, I don't think you can see this, but there, it'll show you every version of the ride that you have here, and you can check or uncheck whichever ones you want to import. I'm just importing the 135 version again. You'll see it pop up right here. And now what I normally do is just double click here to rename it, and I'll say .2.0. And you can keep doing that. The more changes you make, the more often you can show the more often you can make different versions. So that way you'll have maybe a whole list of 10 different rides there before you get to your final version that you really like. And that happens to me quite frequently. But that way you can just save your versions. And a lot of times I think also what you'll find is one of your earlier versions might inspire you to make an entirely different ride. Or to take the ride in a totally different direction. So we're just going to go ahead and go to, actually, let me show you properties real fast too. I'm assuming that you all have looked at some of the other videos, but if not, I'll just run down some of this very quickly. I usually change the friction parameter to 0.027. I think it starts at 0.030. I find that it imports better into NoLimits. That way it seems to match the friction in NoLimits better. Also, unfortunately, it doesn't match it 100%, and I do have the professional version of NoLimits, which allows you to change the friction parameters in that software as well, but I have not been able to get that to work successfully. If I change the friction parameters to 0.027 in NoLimits, it still doesn't seem to match up for me. So what I sometimes have to do is check the speed in FVD later on in the ride, let's say like right here or something. I'll see what the speed is, and then I'll check it against NoLimits. And if it's not exactly the same, I'll just add a quick little boost in the NoLimits section. It's cheating a little bit. I hide the boost, but what are you going to do? The Heartline field is here. You can change it up and down. For almost all rides, it's 1.1 meters. There is the help section up here has the meter. I'll show that to you real fast. The help section up here has conversions, which will show you all the different Heartlines. They're also available on NoLimits Central. Your track style you can choose here. I'm using B&M, and then you have the option of choosing wireframe or not wireframe. I always uncheck it because I like to look at the actual track versus the wireframe model, but that's up to you. So we've got our track highlight, or we've got our version highlighted, and we're going to click Edit. And here we are. We're getting into the meat and potatoes of this. You can see you always start with an anchor point, and then we've got several pieces here that make up the entire ride. So one thing I did say was at the start that I'm going to assume that you know how to do straight and curved sections. There are plenty of videos that show that. For some reason, it just seems like a lot of people start series and then they never finish them, so you end up knowing how to do straight and curved sections pretty well, and you can kind of piece together from other series, maybe how to do a drop or how to do an Immelman or something like that. But let's just assume you know how to do this much of it. So since we're going to be changing quite a bit of this, I'm going to go ahead and delete almost all of this. So I delete from the back, so we're deleting piece 8, and you'll see everything starting to disappear here. Delete that. So we're going to go with this. And I'll run down very briefly what all this is. So you start with the anchor, which is just like your start vertex in NoLimits 2. Your anchor here, you can specify its position using the X, Y, and Z points on the graph. I have it at a Y of 15 feet. It has no pitch here, which is what you would put right here. If you wanted a gravity fed station, you could change the pitch to about -2, and you could completely do without any kind of drive tires in the station. I actually like gravity fed stations. I think they're pretty cool, especially on older rides, because there are some that are really sloped downhill. I know the one that just springs to mind immediately is the Dragon Coaster at Playland in New York. The station is very sloped in that, and I just found it really cool. You can change the speed coming out of the anchor. That's really not important right now. It's more important when you get to the straight section here. I made this 75 feet, and the fixed speed on this is 22.369 miles an hour. That's a conversion from the metric. I'm using imperial units, obviously. I usually, typically, obviously, we're not going to be coming out of the station on a real ride at 22 miles an hour, but this is why I usually leave it at that, and I'll show you another trick on the lift as well. If you click the mouse, right-click the mouse in this section of the window, that's how you can move around and look at things. And if you hit the space bar, that'll put you on the actual track, and then the normal WASD sort of thing moves you forwards and backwards. It took me a long time to figure that out, and I didn't see it specified anywhere. So the reason I keep the station speed at 22 miles an hour is if you put it at a more rational speed, like say 5, it takes forever to get up and down the lift hill. So I like to do that just for my own sanity. You'll see that I put it more, once we come to the top, you'll see that the speed has dropped down right here to 8 miles an hour. Because that's more realistic, and I want the speed that it's going to be going at the top of this lift to be realistic, because that's going to determine how the force graph works in just a few minutes. But for my own sanity, I make it just faster on the lift. And you can use shift to go faster, and I think control goes slower. Yeah. So let's come out of here again. So we did a straight section of 75 feet for the station. You see it's highlighted there in red. You also see this is the graph for that. There's not much going on that graph right now, so we're not going to discuss it. We've got a curve section now. That is this curve right here. And what you can specify in a curve section is the radius of the curve, the angle of the curve, the total angle, the direction. 0 is always up. -180 is down. 90 is, I think, left, and -90 is right, or vice versa. And then you specify the lead in and lead out. If you don't know what that is, there's a fairly easy example of it. What happens is when you've got a curve, you want a curve that you're riding, you want a lead into that curve so that it's not as if you're going straight and then suddenly you're curving, because that tends to produce a very forceful motion to the left or the right. If you have a more gradual bend into that curve, it's much smoother. And you'll find on a lot of old aero coasters that they didn't have this lead in and lead out of turns. Oftentimes the track would be going straight and it would just immediately start curving, and it just results in a much more jarring sensation. So that's why you use the lead in and lead out. And there are times when you don't use one or the other, which I'll show you in just a moment. And then finally we've got the straight section right here, which is just the body of our lift. And then we've got the curve one more time. And you see I kept that at 22 miles an hour there as well, because I just wanted to be able to go fast up the lift. And then we've got this final curve, which the radius is a little bit different. The angle is 45 degrees, and the direction is -180. Like I said before, that makes it so that you're going down this way. And the end right here, the pitch is 15 degrees. You'll see that right there. I usually end my lift pitches at 15, 20 degrees, somewhere around there before I begin a force section. That's just what I do. I know that on the Shambhala drop video, I think that he also did it 15 degrees, and that's just what I've done from the start. Let's see, let's make sure I haven't left anything out. Oh yeah, the lead in and lead out. You'll see that I did not use a lead out here. I used a lead in of 10 degrees. So that means there's roughly 10 degrees of lead in. And if you look closely, you can see that the curve gradually starts before it gets actually the full on curve. But I left the lead out because I don't want it to go from, right now it's curving, the force, when we add the force graph on here and we start fooling with it, it will automatically adjust. I'm having a little bit of difficulty explaining exactly what happens, but I don't want to put a lead out, because then what will happen is, well, let's go ahead and put one in and we'll see. Just keep your eye on the piece of track right here. When I change this to 10 degrees, well, it doesn't seem to look that different, but what happens is it starts to get more straight. So what would happen is the force will be coming from this straight, and I don't want that. I want it to be 0. So there you can see it's still curving. That'll allow the force to be a little more smooth. You'll see that in just a moment. And speaking of smooth, we also have the smoothing button up here, which for the longest time I didn't use this. I don't know why. Finally, I watched a video where someone had used it, and I was like, I need to start using that. So you just click on the smooth, and if you can see this pop up, that's fine. If you can't, sorry about that. But I always check the very first box at the top with enabled. That does it for the entire track. Every single piece over here will be smoothed. The software will automatically do that for you, and you'll already be making smooth pieces with FVD, but this just adds an extra layer of smoothing to it overall. And then you can depump the track as well in NoLimits too, and it really does make a difference. So I'm going to say OK on that, and here we are. We're ready to go. We've got our station, we've got our lift, and we're at the top. One more change I'm going to make is, if you recall, I said I wanted to change the first turnaround on the coaster itself. So I want to add just a little bit more speed. If we switch back into the camera view, you'll see right here, I think we are 135, and you can see the height over here. The Y position is 135. It changes right there. I want to make this about 140, 142, because I think the turnaround is going to drain a little more energy, because it's going to have more going on than just that sort of flat turn. So in order to do that, I'm just going to make the straight section a little bit longer, and you can see how this is rising up right there. And unfortunately, this is showing me, this Y132 is showing me the end right here. So in order to see how high I am, I'm going to come up here. And what did we hit 142? I think we did. Yep, 142.001. I'm going to leave it right there. Let's have 142 foot drop. All right, so we're ready to go. Finally, we're getting into the forces. So what does it mean to design around a force? It's very counterintuitive from when you first think about coaster design, or at least for me it was. I did actually major in mathematics, so I do have a background in math. But the one thing about math is that I'm much better at using it and doing what needs to be done with it versus thinking about the theory and so forth. So one thing I think you'll find as we go through this FVD tutorial is that I'm just going to really be showing you how to use the program. I'm not going to be showing you or talking about the Euler method and this kind of thing and so forth. I think some of the other videos talk about derivatives and so forth and so on, and that's fine. They have a deeper understanding of coaster design, and that's certainly admirable, and props to them, because they really know what they're doing. But for a lot of you, if you don't have that kind of background, it just doesn't make much sense, and it's just gibberish to you. It's really another language, so I'm not even going to be discussing that. So what I do want to say, though, is that we're talking about designing around forces. So that means you have to get it out of your head. Let's say we are making a straight drop right here, and it's going into a flat turn like you would have on an Intamin Megalite, and you want it banked at 75 degrees. You want the hill at 80 degrees, and you want the bank at the bottom of the turn at 75 degrees. Designing with forces does not work like that. You are never designing based on, there is no input over here to say, oh, I want it banked at this degrees, or I want the hill at this degrees. What you're designing on is based on the force the rider is experiencing at any given moment of the ride. And a lot of that is right here. So what you can see here is we've got a pitch of -15. We already talked about that. We have 0 roll right now because the track is not rolling left to right, which is somewhat synonymous with banking, but it's a little bit different as well. And I'm just going to leave it at that. The speed is 8 miles an hour. That's what we did. And the V acceleration is 0.855. This is the vertical acceleration. So the rider right now is experiencing 0.855 Gs. Normal G is 0.981. and the X acceleration is laterals, and the rider is experiencing no laterals right now. So you need to keep an eye on these things here too. It's going to give you a lot of information. But so right now we know that the rider is experiencing 0.855. We're getting ready to go down a hill. We definitely want some sort of negative G here. I mean, I'm assuming you do. If we don't have any kind of negative forces, it's going to be a pretty boring ride. And I know this is going to be viewed mostly by enthusiasts, so I know what you're looking for. You can, with all that being said, you can design this to have a vertical drop if you want. For example, I spent a lot of time using FVD to really duplicate the first drop on Sky Rush, and I was able to do it. It's just that you're not ever going to be able to just put 90 degrees. You're going to have to fool around with it. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, we're going to get about a negative 0.7 negative G's on this ride. So that's what I'm going for here. You'll see that we have three things that we can control here, three graphs. We can control the normal force, which is up and down. We can control the, let me go back here to the graph list, the roll speed, which will be our banking, and we can control the lateral force as well. we're doing B&M here. B&M has very few lats in their design. So that's not even a graph I think we're going to be touching at this point. If we were designing a GCI ride, that might be something different. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to select dynamic just by clicking on it. You see we can click on any of these. Click on it here, and we're going to, we're going to select the lateral, and we're going to click dynamic over here. So what that means is this graph will be dynamic. It will automatically change to match these two. If we don't have that, and you'll see what happens here, and this is something else that took me quite some time to figure out when I was first learning this. If I append, which means add another piece on here at the end, a graph, you'll see the transition is 1 second longer than the section. And you see that nothing showed up here beyond what we have, and that's because we didn't specify. We specified the normal force, but we didn't specify the roll or the lats. If we set both of these to dynamic, which I'll do right now, there, they automatically match, and you see this got longer. Now, obviously, this looks nothing like what we want. So we're going to leave those dynamic because we're not going to have, right at the moment, we're not going to have any roll, we're not going to have any lats, we're just going down a straight hill. We're going to leave this dynamic, and you can see here that this shows you the change in the graph right here, so of the normal force. So it's fairly steady right now. Let's say we want this to, let me actually delete this because just remove that, and I can make this one longer by just either using the up and down buttons or putting my cursor here and scrolling. So let's say that I want this to go down to 0.7 Gs. Right now it's on a cubic function. All you're going to be using, I'm assuming you're a beginner, we're going to be using cubic and quartic functions only. Those are the two easiest things to use. There are quite a few choices here. We've got linear, quadratic, quintic, sinusoidal, and plateau in addition to cubic and quartic. These are more advanced, and you can do some pretty neat stuff with them. But for right now, let's choose cubic and quartic, and I'll show you the difference between those two. So you keep your eye on this graph right here. I'm going to start choosing the G's here and moving them downward. So you can see the graph is moving down to how many G's right here the rider's going to be experiencing. And I'm going to take it down to about negative 0.7646, we'll say. You can see that right here, negative 6.6. So you see that this graph starts out with us being at our normal G-force, which is about 0.981, and it goes down slowly to negative 6.46. So that's what happens here to the rider. That's what they're experiencing. The pitch is negative 82 degrees. So we're almost at a negative 83 degree angle here. That's the cubic function. If we want to do the quartic function, which we'll do later, you see what happens is it starts out at 981, it goes down to the negative 7, and then it goes back up to the normal force. So what happens here is it starts out normal here. Suddenly there's a extreme ejector airtime right here where you're thrown up to negative 7, and then by the time it gets back down here, it's back to 981. Usually for drops, you don't do that too often. You use the cubic for that. And then also you can control the shape somewhat by changing the time it takes to do that. You can see here that we can change that. I'm going to leave it about like that because that looks about right to me. So maybe just a little bit longer. Let's make it about there, that a little bit longer. All right, so what happens is we've got here, if we append another section, it's still going to be down negative G's. And you can move this over, by the way, by left clicking on here and moving this over. And you can make it bigger and smaller by just having your cursor in this area and using the mouse wheel. So it's still saying -7 here. Obviously, this looks like nothing that we want to do. Instead, what we want to do is to start feeling positive G's because we're coming to the bottom of the drop. So we're going to up this to 3.5. There's nothing extreme. We'll just say 3.5. And I really want this to hit right on the ground here. So we've moved the G's. In 1 second, it's going to go from -7 up to 3.5. And watch what happens. When we append it, it's a little bit below. So here's where we get into where we're just going to start fooling around with it a little bit. 1 second is probably, it's not going to be the smoothest thing in the world. Let's ride it and see what it looks like. So we start going down, and then it looks all right. It's not too bad. But I don't want it to be on the ground or underground like that because I plan to, the terrain is such that it's flat right here. And that's in my mind. So I'm going to make this part a little bit smaller because that's going to pull this up. When I say this part, I mean the top here. So let's just take this up to now it's at 2 seconds. Let's take it up to about 1.9, and we can add, if we really want trying to get precise, we can start adding tenth, hundredths, and thousandths of a second. I'm going to say let's try 0.9 or 1.9.4, and that looks about right. So you see that looks pretty much like what we designed just a moment ago, and I can actually compare it if you want. If I go back to project and choose the 135, that's the complete one. You see it's a little bit higher now because we added the 7 feet. It's a little bit steeper. Do I like this better? Let me look at it by itself. Do I like to edit? Looks all right to me, I guess. Let's ride it again. And keep in mind also that one other thing, I think I kind of glossed over this. When we were at the curve section right here, we had the speed specified at 8 miles an hour. Once we get onto a fourth section, the speed is dynamic. We're on a fourth section here. The speed is dynamic. The program is calculating it based on our input of the graph down here. So you'll see as we go down, at the bottom, we're going 62 miles an hour. And which you can see right here. Let me go back for just a minute. I want to make sure that so the negative G's are about -64, or excuse me, -0.64. And the speed, or not the pitch is 84 degrees. So not too bad. It's close to vertical. That'll be exciting looking from the ground for the spectators. It doesn't look exactly like a B&M. We already talked about that. I don't really care about that. So one last thing we're going to do, and that will end this episode, is we're going to put the slight curve at the bottom of this drop. So remember that our red graph controls roll. I'm going to take dynamic off because now we're going to introduce a change to the roll speed because if you remember the coaster, it goes off here to the right just a bit. So I'm going to roll the track a little bit to the right. Let's move back a little bit. Over, and I'm going to shorten this to where I think, roughly, I think the curve should start. We're going to say about right here. I'm going to pen, it automatically pens 1 second. You can make it as much as you want. I'm going to say, and you see here you get, it's 1 second longer, or 0.10 seconds longer. That's because it went over the end here where this is. So it's not going to show that section unless we make this longer. So for now, we're just going to make it 1.6. And I'm going to, with the roll, you can do the same thing. You can make a quartic or cubic. I'm going to make this, I think, 65 degrees. And that's going left. So if I want to go the other way, I'm going to say -65. All right, good. So if I hadn't chosen the roll in exactly the right spot, it might have caused us to go underground a little bit. I can actually show you. I'm not going to do that. All right, so let me ride this one more time. Let's see if it rides like I want. I don't think it does because I want the roll to start. I don't like the way that looks. I want it to start a little bit higher so it's not like drop curve. I want it to kind of be, or excuse me, like they're two separate entities. I kind of want it to be like it's curving while it's dropping. So there's two ways I could do that. I could either move this back a little bit and the curve will start right there, and then I can go to the end of this and append an extra. So let's see what that looks like. So you see we appended a little bit more at the bottom so we can see that. Let me see what that looks like. I still don't like that. What I'm going to do instead, yeah, it rides kind of weird now. What I'm going to do instead is take this off, remove, and I'm going to make this longer, this actual curve. So it starts right there. I'm going to add that. Oops. Let's make it the same as this, sorry, and see what this looks like. Yeah, that's a little bit better. I think I can start it even farther back and make it even longer. So what I did was change this time. I lessened the time here, started the curve earlier, and now I'm making the curve last longer. So it's now taking almost 2.2 seconds to start curving. And I like that a little bit better. Let's see, and it's roughly at, yeah, I can probably fix it up a little bit. That's probably too much now. Yeah, that's too much. Let's fix this up some more. So you see a lot of this FVD is just playing around with it. You can play and say, well, that looks all right, but I would rather do this or yada, yada, yada. And let me make this a little bit longer so we can see what's going on here, because now these two are equal. And now it's underground, so I'm going to fix that by making this longer. Remember, we made this drop a little bit shorter. Let me take out the 4. I'll just make it 1.9. And there, it's right on the ground down there. Let's see. Yeah, that looks all right. All right. So now everyone's biggest question is, how do we get back to 0? This is the one thing that everyone seems to have a problem with, getting back to 0, because there's nothing here that's going to let you specify, oh, I want to go back to 0. And you know what? We're going to say that for the next episode. I'm going to leave you with a cliffhanger. So that's it for this episode. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Of course, you can like and subscribe too if you want. But as I said, in the next episode, I'm going to show you how to return to 0 in terms of this roll, because right now we're at a, what are we, 65-degree roll or something like that? No, we're at a, where's roll? Right here. 44-degree roll. So I'm going to show you how to get this back to 0. That's something that people have a lot of trouble with. So like I said, question, comment below, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next episode.